I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, after protesters once again gathered across Ukraine yesterday, we look at today's parliamentary vote to reinstate the independence of anti-corruption agencies. Plus, as Donald Trump's latest deadline for a ceasefire approaches, we ask if his patience is actually running out, as he warns Dmitry Medvedev is entering dangerous territory by criticising the US president's words.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Thursday, the 31st of July, 3 years and 159 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by our Brussels correspondent Joe Barnes, and later you'll hear Francis speak to one of the small teams of American servicemen and women quietly experimenting with the future of warfare. A couple of headlines before we get on with the military updates. So just in the last hour, or just over an hour actually to be fair, 331 votes in favour of ensuring the independence of the anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine. It's been voted through. This is the overturning of the bill a couple of weeks ago that's caused such unrest and indeed protests across Ukraine. So this comes after that, as I say, the July the 22nd vote when 263 MPs backed the bill that stripped those two anti-corruption agencies of their independence, sparking protests across the country. More from Joe on that shortly, but there were no votes against. I think there were 9 abstentions, but an absolute whitewash, which, as we will discuss a little bit later, raises some other questions. Anyway, the second headline, Donald Trump has warned Dmitry Medvedev that he is, quote, entering dangerous territory after the former Russian president said earlier this week, each new ultimatum from Donald Trump is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. Now, interesting, he tries to use the same kind of language that Trump responds to, the whole Sleepy Joe thing, but it just didn't quite land. So responding to that, Donald Trump posted on his Truth social network, tell Medvedev, the failed former president of Russia, who thinks he's still president, to watch his words. He's entering very dangerous territory. So more on that as well from Joe shortly. But now on with the military updates. Overnight attacks on Kyiv killed 9, injured 107, according to Ukrainian authorities this morning, including a 6-year-old boy. 309 Shahed-type drones and 8 Iskander-K cruise missiles were fired at Ukraine last night. Air defences intercepted 288 drones and 3 of the missiles, but 21 drones and 5 missiles did get through, one missile hitting a residential building in Kyiv. 27 locations in total were hit across the capital, including the children's ward of a hospital in the Shevchenkivsky district. That's the sort of central area leading out to the west or west-northwest. A school and kindergarten were also damaged in the Golosivsky district. That's in the south of the city. That is where it is. But that news comes from Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko. 4 people were killed in the Sviatoshnytsky district. That's on the western outskirts of the city. And 2 more in the Solomyansky area. That's to the southwest of the city centre, around the main train station and south of there. Now, Oleg Kalinovich, who's a representative of Kyiv's Muslim community, said the mosque of the Islamic Cultural Centre was damaged as well. No injuries there. In response, President Zelensky said, today the world once again saw Russia's response to our desire for peace, shared with America and Europe, new showcase killings. That is why peace without strength is impossible. But forcing Moscow to make peace, compelling them to come to a real negotiating table, all the tools needed for this are in the hands of our partners. We need to fully block Russia's war machine, put every frozen Russian asset, including the stolen wealth of corruption, to work, defending against Russian aggression. It's time to confiscate Russian assets, not just freeze them, confiscate them and use them to serve peace, not war. Andriy Yermak, Zelensky's chief advisor, said Putin is showing the world he's not afraid and intends to keep killing our people, our children. Interestingly, one of the responses I saw was from Megan Mobbs, who's the daughter of the US Special Envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg. Ms. Mobbs wrote on X, Kyiv is under massive drone attack. Make no mistake, this is Putin's response to President Trump's deadline. He is testing American resolve and strength. We must not be found wanting. I thought that was a particularly interesting intervention from her. Now, the deadline she talks about there, that's the 50-day deadline, or the latest deadline that Donald Trump has put in, threatening to impose sanctions on Moscow. I think the latest date is August the 8th. He said if Putin doesn't agree to a ceasefire. You'll remember on Tuesday, Donald Trump said 10 days from today, and then we're going to put on some tariffs and stuff. So that's where we get August the 8th from. Now, across the rest of the country, Dnipro, Poltava in the centre of the country, Sumy to the north and Mykolaiv in the south were also attacked last night. As I say, over 300 drones and 8 ballistic missiles in total fired across the country. Then, just as Jonathan Vaseviov, who's the Secretary General of Estonia's Foreign Ministry, said on Twitter, a permanent member of the UN Security Council bombed civilian targets in a European capital again. Or you could take the words of Elena Halushka. She's co-founder of the advocacy platform, the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. She said, how is this still happening? How can Russia be allowed to casually wipe out one residential building after another, facing full impunity? Where is that beautiful international law that so vigorously protects frozen Russian money? Why doesn't it protect us with the same urgency? Good question, Ms. Halushka. I don't know the answer. Another piece of news. Ukrainian news outlet TSN, citing Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko, says Russia has used rocket-powered Shahed-type drones in last night's attack on Kyiv, marking an escalation potentially in the drone war. Mr. Klimenko said there is preliminary information that there were rocket-powered Shahed-type drones which have been used against civilian and municipal infrastructure in Ukraine and Kyiv several times. Now, this isn't new news. The first jet-powered drone was reportedly shot down in January last year. And while the military has not disclosed technical details about this, the new rocket-powered variant, Kyiv Independent says it has confirmed, as in the military have confirmed to them, 8 such drones were used last night. These drones are much harder to shoot down. They basically fly higher and faster, so can evade ground-based air defence more easily, requiring perhaps Ukraine to use the much more expensive missiles to bring them down, which obviously there is a dwindling stock of. Now, sticking on drones, and the Institute for the Study of War, the US-based think tank, says that it's seen reports that Russian forces have coated Shahed-type drones in poisonous substances, likely as part of the Kremlin's efforts to inflict greater casualties on Ukrainian civilians, they say. This comes after the SBU, Ukraine's security service, said yesterday that it had documented over 10,000 instances of Russian forces using ammunition equipped with chemical agents, which the Chemical Weapons Convention, to which Russia is a signatory, prohibits. 10,000 since the start of the full-scale invasion, I should add. The SBU said Russian forces frequently use ampules filled with chloropicrin and aerosol grenades equipped with riot control agents, it's CS and CN gas, chlorobenzylidinylamitril, and chloroacetopherenone. Anyway, CS and CN riot control agents, which should not be used in the manner to which they are by Russia, allegedly. The SBU says the largest number of incidents have occurred in Nicholls in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, just southwest of Zaporizhia city. I don't know if this is an experimental unit or a rogue commander, but for some reason the Russian forces in that very localized area seem to be using riot control agents in a manner against the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now, on the ground, Russia advanced yesterday near Siversk in Donbass and to the southwest a little bit, southwest of Bakhmut, but the Ukrainian army has denied Russia's claim that it's captured the eastern stronghold of Chasiv Yar. Viktor Trigubov, who's a spokesperson for the Horizia Operational Strategic Group of Forces, said, I always advise not to consider the Russian Ministry of Defense as a source of information. They simply lie systemically, and the very approach of having us comment on their latest lies every time is wrong. Now, I would say that I've obviously been away for a couple of weeks, and with that perspective, I sort of brought myself up to speed this morning, having a look at the movement on the ground. I can see how little Russia has gained. They are moving west in certain areas, not blanket across the board. I've called it the big international Jenga game. They're pushing to find a weak spot, and where they do, trying to reinforce that area. So there are areas where they've been pushing west, but it's by no means up and down across the whole line. They are clearly prioritising the Donbass, attempting to bypass and envelop across and Konstantinivka. There is some movement elsewhere along the line, but very, very little. It does sometimes take a bit of distance to see the bigger picture. And just a couple more for me. The Kyiv Independent reporting this morning that a source in the SBU, the Security Service of Ukraine, has told them that a Ukrainian drone struck a Russian radio electronics plant in the western Russian city of Penza. That's about 600 kilometres northeast of Kharkiv. This is the JSC Radio Zavod plant, a sanctioned facility owned by the Russian state-owned Rostec Defense Corporation. It apparently burst into flames this morning. There's images on social media you'll be able to find. Burst into flames, followed by 11 explosions, the source in the SBU said. Penza Oblast Governor Oleg Melnichenko confirmed the attack, adding that the subsequent widespread mobile service disruptions were just for safety reasons. He said mobile internet restrictions were temporarily in place across the city. Andrei Kovalenko, the head of Ukraine's Centre for Countering Disinformation, said it is a key enterprise of the Russian military-industrial complex. Always wary of that word key. I mean, big, small, not entirely sure, but something significant has happened to that centre. As an aside, I used to briefly work for Jacko Page in the army, a very odd individual, a very bright but very odd man. And we the staff were told, if we were writing to the general, writing to the commander, we should not use the word key in any of our staff work. We were told, don't even use the word key if you're explaining to the general how you got into your front door. Anyway, there we go. That's my beef with the word key. Now, farther south in Volgograd Oblast, so this is the oblast directly east of Ukraine, regional officials confirmed Ukraine's recent campaign of attacks against Russian infrastructure has continued. Drones apparently targeting transportation and energy sites in the area. A video published by the independent Russian outlet Astra shows a large fire burning at the site of a strike in Kotelnikovo. That's about 200 km east of Ukraine. The Russian Telegram channel Shot reported that residents a little to the northeast in the suburbs of Volgograd, that's the city formerly known as Stalingrad, heard up to 5 explosions. Russian MOD said that air defences had shot down 31 Ukrainian drones over 6 regions, including 11 over Volgograd Oblast. Now, just connected to that, former Ukrainian military officer and founder of the Front Intelligence Insight website, an individual going by the name of Tatrigami, says the area around the Kotelnikovo traction substation is on fire, according to NASA's FIRMS hotspot map. FIRMS, you'll remember, is the Fire Information for Resource Management System. It provides near real-time active fire data from low Earth orbit satellites. Videos from that town show multiple fires across the area following those drone strikes. So a lot of Russian drone strikes against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine and Ukraine drone strikes against military infrastructure in Russia. So not a lot has changed since I've been away. However, Joe, there have been quite a few movements on the diplomatic front. I'd like you to bring us up to speed, please. And then I have a few questions because I've been a very lazy boy and have not been listening to Ukraine the latest while I was away. Although apart from one day when I listened anonymously just to keep Francis on his toes. And I haven't told him which day that was yet. But Joe, welcome to pod. Always a delight to have you on. What have you got for us on the diplomatic front?
Yep. Hi, folks. Let's go to the Ukrainian parliament and that vote today on the bill to restore independence of the country's anti-corruption agencies. And it appeared to be an all-action debate, including a fist fight. And I've always wanted to be a sports commentator, so let's give it a go. So first, the action. If you take yourself to the Telegraph website and our Ukraine live blog, you'll see our video wizards have carefully highlighted what appears to be one man wearing a dark polo shirt, gesturing to another man in a white T-shirt, almost urging him to come outside for a scrap. As the man in the white T-shirt gestures back, the other man launches a swinging overhand right, maybe Alexander Usyk would be proud of, which seems to connect with his target's back, who then attempts to return fire with his own, I think it was a left hook rather than a right hook, a left hook. They were quickly separated, pulled apart. I'm not sure what he's not worth it is in Ukrainian, but the scenes were very reminiscent of a very anticlimactic drunken barroom brawl at Christmas time in your local Wetherspoons, if you're a Brit listening today. Let's get to the serious business. Why is this bill important? You remember Volodymyr Zelensky and his now controversial and all-powerful Chief of Staff Andrei Yermak sparked the first wartime protests against their leadership by ramming through this really contentious bill that essentially eliminated the independence of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU, and its partner organisation, the Specialised Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, SAPO, by basically putting them under the direct control of the Ukrainian Prosecutor's Office, a position that is appointed by the president. So as well as the protests, which were reminiscent of Maidan, without calling, let's remember, Zelensky wasn't being told to step down. People don't want the shift. They weren't protesting to end the war. They were protesting about this very one specific issue, which was about taking away the independence of these agencies. And I'll explain later why they're important. Zelensky was also met with warnings from the likes of Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, the EU's Ursula von der Leyen, France's Emmanuel Macron, basically saying what you're doing is not right. Most of Western aid to Ukraine is contingent on Ukraine continuing to reform its system and basically moving to a more Western system and moving away from its days of corruption when it was a part of the Soviet Union and then a sort of a Soviet-leaning satellite state, now to the Ukraine we know today. I think it's 9 days after that initial bill was rammed for a very secretive Ukrainian parliament session. The latest bill is confirmation of the U-turn and hopefully, in President Zelensky's eyes anyway, the ending of his first real political crisis since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 22. Let's look at NABU and SAPO. They were formed with the help of Ukraine's Western partners in the aftermath of those Euromaidan protests that ousted the pro-Russian and widely seen as corrupt Viktor Yanukovych. They were designed to function independently of the Prosecutor General, which I mentioned earlier, because that position is appointed directly by the president. NABU's task is to investigate corruption, while SAPO's is to prosecute the offenders. And last week's law would have placed them under the direct control of an authority appointed by the president. So a big move. It's going to be viewed positively by Ukraine's armed forces, because despite being told not to join the protests in Kyiv, they did. Civil society is going to be happy, but let's see. Looking at the instant reaction on X from politicians and members of civil society, they've said democracy wins. But let's see how that plays out, because it is breaking news just before we came on live on air. I think, Dom, you covered off the Medvedev and Trump exchange very well, but let's look at just taking a step back and looking why that's important and can be viewed as a positive step by Ukraine and its allies, as these rows are a sign that Donald Trump is tearing away from that fabric and the accusation that he was being pro-Russian, that he favoured Putin, and maybe a sign that instead of siding with Russia, he's going to do more to help Ukraine. And in another social media rant, he called Russia and India a dead economy, so probably another sign that he's not willing to do business with Vladimir Putin anymore, because Vladimir Putin doesn't have anything to offer, which is only good because Ukraine is there and willing to be a business partner. Let's look at some interesting comments from President Zelensky. He has said the world should push for, and I quote, regime change, end quote, in Russia, arguing that Putin would otherwise continue to destabilise neighbours. I believe Russia can be pushed to stop this war, the Ukrainian president told a conference marking 50 years since the signing of the Helsinki Final Act on respecting borders and territorial integrity. It started and it can be made to end, but if the world doesn't aim to change the regime in Russia, that means even after the war ends, Moscow will try to destabilise neighbouring countries. Look, I don't think this is the first time Zelensky has suggested that the war and basically Russia as we know it now will only end with Vladimir Putin's death. But it is striking that he's essentially leaning on Western allies and calling on them to join in with this regime change theory. It's a different tactic. He's normally used to asking allies for air defence. I need weapons, not rides. But actually now trying to contribute to that regime change element is interesting. But let's see how that plays out. I don't think it's going to be widely seen as helpful in Europe, in America, because they do not want to be seen as being directly involved in the war. That yes, we support Ukraine, we help Ukraine defend its sovereign territory against an illegal war of aggression, but we are not a direct part of this war. Anyway, let's shift across back to Washington and let's talk about the Peace Act, which is moving through the US political system as we speak. It may sound a bit alien for now, but actually it's the political basis of the Donald Trump deal with Mark Rutte, which essentially paves the way for European nations to buy American weapons for Ukraine. The usual process is European countries could buy directly from US manufacturers, so whether it's Raytheon, and for the Patriot interceptors, I can't remember who makes the Bradley, but they have their manufacturers, and F-16 as well, so Lockheed. Normally, it goes through the manufacturers, terribly slow process because it needs all sorts of export declarations as well as this stuff needs to be made. But this new scheme, which was dreamt up between Donald Trump and Mark Rutte, will make it faster because it allows European allies to buy directly from US stocks. So basically cutting out the middleman, expediting the process. And then, because these weapons are there, they're ready to be delivered. What weapons, you ask? We don't actually know yet, but assumptions would lead me to say, first of all, Patriot interceptors, artillery ammunition, GMLRS, which are the rockets that are fired from the HIMARS rocket launcher systems. They'll be the top priority list because they are things that only artillery ammunition know, but definitely the GMLRS and the Patriot interceptors and Patriot batteries. They're only things the Americans can deliver. No other European country can pull together supplies of those weapons and capabilities. But, of course, it could one day extend to long-range missiles if there is an agreement between Washington and European capitals to do so. So this was all reported by the Wall Street Journal, and they're saying the Peace Act is being proposed by Senators Roger Wicker and Jim Risch. And this is what they both have to say. Wicker said, "This is the fastest way to arm Ukraine as well as minimise the strategic and military threat posed by Russia to the US and NATO." His colleague, Mr. Risch, said, "Together we will send a clear message to Putin that there are consequences for his refusal to negotiate in good faith." And yeah, as well as these sanctions, and we're going to speak about that, the tariffs that Donald Trump's threatening, that likely indicates that he's also willing to step up these deliveries and get that sorted. And then I'm going to end on a interesting one because it helps, I think, cut through some of the political narrative that Russia blames this war on NATO, and it isn't about conquering Ukraine and taking back what Vladimir Putin, in his eyes, sees as his and Russia's. Russian state media outlet RIA Novosti on the 30th of July published a column titled "There is no other option. No one should be left alive in Ukraine." In the piece, columnist Kirill Shrilnikov described Ukrainians as, and I quote, "happy with their fate and claims they are," I quote again, "ready to die for what he calls the best army in the world." So it basically refers to the article, he refers to Ukrainian soldiers as laboratory rats, denies that they're human, and said there is no need to wear lacy underwear for the dead. Slightly weird phrasing. He repeats classic Kremlin propaganda lines, including that Ukraine is just a military training ground for the West and that Ukrainians are mere pawns for the US and Europe. So I just think of it what you will, but for me that sort of says a lot about why Putin sanctioned this war. He doesn't actually believe Ukraine's a state, and it's not about his claims of massive encroachment on Russian territory by NATO or a US and European proxy war against the Kremlin. It's all about he doesn't believe in Ukrainian statehood, and Russian state-run media is putting out information to that respect. And yeah, I'll stop there, Dom.
Well, I think so. Looks like Medvedev's not the only one that's been hitting the minibar. Now, as I said earlier, I've been away for a couple of weeks. Had a very nice holiday. Thank you very much. Where was I? Where's Wally? Where was Wally? I was looking at a geological formation that's known as a nightmare in stone. So where was I? I also, well, here you go. I'm going to basically tell you. I wanted to go and visit the lavender fields in Provence, and I got there just 1 month late. They harvested it a month ago. Anyway, but yeah, so I was away and I was sort of tracking the news, but I was trying to switch off. I think it's good for us all to switch off every now and again. I didn't want to rely on Francis to bring me up to speed because God knows where that would end up. So I kind of am up to speed with the anti-corruption bill, and thank you for taking us through it today. I see the vote today, just in the last hour or so, has been welcomed by the EU. The EU's ambassador to Ukraine, Katerina Madanova, she said on Twitter about an hour ago, said, important step for re-establishing trust with the society and international partners. But Joe, so my question now, you've been looking at this more than me over the last couple of weeks. Has trust been restored? This vote today, what do we say it was? 3-3-1? Was it 3-3-1? 3-3-1 votes in favour, none against. So on the face of it, you go, oh, that's amazing, a complete whitewash. But it wasn't. It was voted through a couple of weeks ago. So, Joe, what's your feeling here? Do you think any of these underlying concerns about President Zelensky's intentions of possibly, here Mr. Yermak, possibly drawing power in a bit tighter than society would want? Do you think these concerns have been put to bed with this vote, or actually are some of these questions still hanging around?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So initially, President Zelensky's idea was to eliminate pro-Russian influence inside these corruption agencies. Some critics of Zelensky would say that both of those agencies were investigating people who are either close to him or close to Andrei Yermak, and they were looking to shut those investigations down. But let's just look at it bigger picture. The European Union is set to deliver around 50 billion euros worth of aid to keep budgetary aid, to keep Ukraine's economy afloat, to pay pensions, to fund schools, hospitals, etc., while it's running its wartime economy. All of that aid is contingent, as I said, on promises to reform and basically crack down on corruption. All of the invites to NATO, it didn't happen, but the gesture that Ukraine is on a one-way road to NATO, an irreversible path, were all done on the basis that Ukraine carries out certain military reforms, but also civil society reforms on corruption. And when this news came out that Zelensky was essentially cracking down on the two independent corruption agencies, he sparked fears instantly in Brussels that, geez, guys, we're going to have to look at our aid that's set to go to Ukraine. I think there was a package of about nearly 2 billion euros that's about to be put through. And they were like, God, guys, we might have to pause this and work out whether Zelensky's contentious bill is in the spirit of the deal that we are doing to aid Ukraine. And there were some doubts over it in Brussels. So Zelensky, quite cleverly, I think, he got on the phone with people like Friedrich Merz, with Keir Starmer, with Emmanuel Macron, and they said, look, we will hold your hand through the creation of this bill and make sure that you basically don't annoy Brussels, don't poke the bear that can be Brussels when you're breaking potential deals. I've not seen any text of it yet, but I don't expect there to be any massive controversy. I think this is a genuine step down from Zelensky. He has realised he's wrong. I don't think he's going to run for election again. That's just a personal prediction. Maybe he's going to be too knackered, used everything he has, being the wartime leader. But he will care about what Ukrainians think about him. He won't want to be seen as the guy who becomes the next Yanukovych, maybe a pro-Western Yanukovych. But he will care about that money coming in to Ukraine. And if there is even a hint or a sniff that Europe is going to cut off the financial pipelines that it's offering to keep Ukraine's economy afloat, he needs to act. So I suspect that this was done in careful coordination with European allies. There is not going to be anything controversial that will upset the apple cart in Brussels. So I think good news on that front.
Okay, well, interesting. I'm interested in your views, folks, especially if you are in Ukraine and if you are protesting. Let us know if your trust has been restored. Joe, Donald Trump. Now, he's not got his ceasefire. We'll see what happens on August the 8th. But, the can has been well and truly kicked down the road. Putin's been thumbing his nose at him. And I thought that Donald Trump didn't get any deal, so he was just going to walk away. And then Medvedev keeps needling him, and others in the Russian firmament, but particularly Medvedev. So is he going to support Ukraine a little bit more or support Russia a little bit less, both of which I think would be a win? And I'll take you back to that statement by Meghan Mobbs, Keith Kellogg's daughter. I thought that was a very interesting observation, and I'm not sure she would have made it if she thought it was going to go against the grain of the administration at the moment. Has Donald Trump changed his tune because Medvedev keeps needling him?
Cycling back, I don't think it's Medvedev that is the reason that Donald Trump is changing his tune. He's a New York businessman who wants to do a deal. He saw Vladimir Putin as a potential business partner. He thought there is money to be made in Russia, and he wants the kudos of ending the bloodiest land war in Europe since the Second World War.
And a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, exactly. Trump is not a complicated man. And from people I've spoken to over the last few weeks, the wording is, we no longer see Vladimir Putin as, and I quote, business partner, end quote. So what has Europe done to capitalise on that? It has presented Donald Trump with a series of deals. You'll go back. Remember, Ukraine has a minerals deal where it's promised profits from its rare resources, its rare earths, its lithium supplies and things like that will go back to America. It is currently doing a drone deal with the Americans where US firms or US businesses are going to invest in Ukrainian production, and the kickback on that is basically the US will get the latest in drone technology, which is being tried and tested on the battlefield in Ukraine successfully. But then you have these other massive deals, which Europe's being quite canny about. You've got the $8 billion potential of US weaponry that could be bought by European nations to give to Ukraine. You've got this EU-US trade deal, which the number is not exactly there, but Ursula von der Leyen, to get that across the road, promised, and we believe the number is going to be hundreds of billions of dollars worth of European weapon purchases of US weapons. So suddenly, Donald Trump's eyes are flickering up and going, if I side with Ukraine, there's money to be made through business deals. And that's just the way of dealing with Donald Trump. When he was in Scotland last week, he had a pop at Sadiq Khan. I can't remember exactly what Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, had said, but it was something to do with he wouldn't let Donald Trump visit London during his first term for a state visit or something like that. And that has niggled in Donald Trump's head long enough that he comes back to the UK and wants to have a pop, not once, but twice at Sadiq Khan, who ultimately is the mayor of a big city. He's a powerful politician, but he's not a national leader. So anyone in Moscow that is needling Donald Trump knows that they risk the wrath. And as Donald Trump quoted, you tread a dangerous path or a dangerous road, whatever he said, because that's only going to add to the spice.
Yeah, what did he say? He said, tell Medvedev, the failed president of Russia, who thinks he's still president. Interesting that. Is he trying to hint to Putin that there's a traitor in the camp? To watch his words. He's entering very dangerous territory. Now, interesting. I mean, I wonder if, as you say, Mark Rutte, who came out with all those comments, and we were wondering if he was taking the very long view right into his memoirs, which we've all got to buy, apparently. But yeah, I wonder if that is the way that Europe either have all come to a conclusion separately, or if this is what the chats have been, all the bilateral chats have been saying, look, this is the way to play it. And I just must say, my final one for you to bring me up to speed, please, Joe, is this EU-US tariff deal. Now, I know it's not fully focused on Ukraine, but as you say, there was a big weapons block in there. And a comment I made before I went on holiday, I said, if this is what the relationship is now with this US administration, that it's not coming to each other's aid because of values and we believe in alliances and partnerships and friendships and what have you, but this is just business. And I ventured that would fine. That would make the US now no longer the leader of the free world, but the leader of the free market. If this is just transactional business, we know how to deal with that. You come up with the money. Donald Trump lets you have the weapons. That might be a better and a smoother and a more efficient relationship to deal with this, the closest wolf to the sledge, which is Russia and Ukraine right now. Do you think that is where it is now, that Europe is able to get money and then just go to the US on the open market and buy weapons, and that is the better way, and they've realised that is the better way of handling this US administration?
Yeah, exactly. Let's give, as I said, like Donald Trump, complicated, intelligent, but ultimately simple man. He likes his victories, he likes his business deals. And I think, the European managed to get this deal, which takes, Donald Trump had threatened a 30% tariff on EU products exported to the US, which would have essentially made European products uncompetitive on the market. 15%, half that, they could still do business there. There's a lot of paperwork to be done, but we're talking about the transatlantic relationship more here. And it's important that Europe have figured Donald Trump out and can give him what he wants. And he's a man that loves big numbers as well. Ursula von der Leyen's promise that Europe is going to buy billions of dollars of US weapons is a clever one. Because Dom, as a military man, will know that the US produces things and capabilities that only the US produces. The F-35 fighter jet. Europe has a load of fantastic fighter jets, the Eurofighter, the Gripen, the Mirage, the Rafale, but none of them do the same job or deliver the same capability as the F-35. So you need that alongside your own fighter jets. There are plenty of short range and medium range capabilities when it comes to air defence, but nothing quite matches the ability to intercept ballistic missiles than a Patriot battery. So Europe would love to be self-sustaining, but it knows it can't be. So realistically, there is a load of orders by European governments for things like Patriots, for things like F-35s, already there. And Ursula von der Leyen has got her officials to bundle up that number and basically say, look, Donald, look at how many US weapons we're buying and how many US weapons we're going to continue to buy, because I have never tried to manufacture a air defence system, but I presume it's going to take more than the time that he is president for Europe to come up with its own version of the Patriot, which can act in that medium to high atmospheric range. We've got 6th generation fighters coming out, is it?
Well, the Tempest is supposedly going to be 6th generation, but it depends where you blur the edges on when you leap from one generation to another. But F-35 is said to be 5th.
Yeah, we don't know if there's going to be a European fighter jet that can do the things the F-35 can do for a long time, at least in the time that Donald Trump's president for. So it's very clever spinning a plate. But it's just, I think, to cut a long story short, is they have realised that Donald Trump is transactional, he loves big numbers, and we will do anything if people are paying for it. And that is ultimately as easy as Donald Trump is. And if Europe is willing to pull some cash out, sign some checks, it will get relatively good access to American weapons. And America will, because the US President, Donald Trump, and Keith Kellogg, his envoy to Ukraine and Russia, has spoken about the need for this stuff to land on the battlefield quickly. Your listeners will remember the story I wrote the other day about how the first Patriot system and the interceptors were basically in Ukraine, ready to be deployed, days after the first agreement was struck and announced between Mark Rutte and Donald Trump. Under Joe Biden, that was unheard of. It would be months in between political decision, announcement, and then delivery. So yeah, they understand the need for rapidity, but also they know delivery of this stuff will make them a quick buck as well, a rapid dollar. And Europe understands that finally, I think.
And now the first in a two-part dispatch on military innovation in US Army Europe, exploring how battlefield lessons from Ukraine and rapidly developed technologies are reshaping military preparedness and strategy for America and its allies. I'm in Wiesbaden, in southwestern Germany, at a large American military barracks. Once slated for closure until rising threats in Europe made a permanent US presence here still essential. Inside one of the buildings, past an organogram with President Trump at the top, followed by US Secretary of Defense Hegseth, a room hums with the sound of 3D printers at work. On the walls, a map of Europe marking NATO and non-NATO states, and the flags of friendly countries, among them the UK, Norway, Poland, Finland, and Ukraine. All around are workspaces scattered with soldering irons, disassembled drones, glowing computer screens, whiteboards, a coffee jug, and a microwave. It feels part university staff room, part engineering lab. And in many ways, it's both. Because this is one of several small teams of American servicemen and women quietly experimenting with the future of warfare. To borrow from James Bond, this is a miniature Q branch.
These are our flights. We'd like to work. That's fine. And then this
I thought they were going to have jet propulsion or something like that.
No.
The machine guns come out.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll leave one of its members to explain.
We are the 2nd Multi-Domain Task Force Innovation Lab, or FORGE. We work for the 2nd Multi-Domain Effects Battalion, so it's like the hierarchy. 2nd Multi-Domain Task Force Command is currently merging with 56th Multi-Domain Command. What that relationship means for the lab and the division and the battalion remains to be seen, but we have 3 primary charters here. One is to do analysis on what program of record equipment the multi-domain task force should strive to achieve or strive to receive in the coming years. Program of record equipment being equipment that is like materially on the books with training pipelines and standardization, the institutional side of equipping soldiers. In lieu of that having happened up until this point, the lab greatly assists the task force and the division with identifying what systems and practices we should look to build, and in the meantime, attempt to build either training surrogates or operational equipment that the task force can utilize and exercise. It's a long-winded way of saying we build aids, things that the task force is able to train on. The second portion, obviously, is to provide an open training space for the task force or NATO partners to come in and see what we do, see if there's anything that we can inject ourselves into or vice versa. And that's open to NATO partners and then other innovation labs throughout USARAF. We've had 173rd and 2CR representatives come through here, as well as our brethren from 1st MDTF to work on different projects and do information exchange. As of right now, there's no official interconnective tissue between these innovative centers of excellence, we'll say, scattered throughout the Army. So we do try to reach out and say, hey, here's some things that we're working on, or the inverse is also true, where we've learned from all these different areas that are working on small-scale UAS like quadcopters, whereas those don't fit as much into our scheme of maneuver. We're working on fixed-wing primarily. One of the biggest challenges that the Army has right now, as we start implementing new technology into the FLOT, and we want every team leader to be a sensor, everybody to have a quad, right? But where do we aggregate that data? How is that data moving from point of origin to point of effectuation, right? Because not everyone that utilizes high-tech equipment has the capability of effectuating the data or calling for fire, manipulating assets to provide positive effects, kinetic or non-kinetic effects on that target set. What we've observed is there's kind of a gap where we're implementing new techniques and we're experimenting with new techniques throughout the Army, but typically the data terminates at the operator, and so we're going back to legacy means of communication to relay that information to someone who can actually do something with the data. So a huge priority for us here in the lab is to work out that network piece. How am I getting data instantaneously from the assets that we either build or bail or rent for our exercises, right? How do we make sure that data is getting from the origin to someone who can effectuate it as expeditiously as possible? We've gotten really, really good at that. And that's kind of the unspoken hardship of integrating new technology in the Army. If you peel back the skin on the vast majority of the UAS platforms that are off the shelf available to the United States Army right now, if you examine the internal components of many blue-listed UAS systems, the core, the guts of them are almost identical. Very similar flight controllers, autopilot modules, similar radio systems, which are available piecemealed to a consumer, that would be us. And so it helps us understand, again, what makes these things tick, what makes them manipulatable, what are the essential components that we would need to buy to construct our own UAS platform that's purpose-built and attritable, that saves the American taxpayer money, it saves my unit money. Where do assets like that fit into our general scheme of maneuver?
Let's have a look around then, shall we?
Yeah.
That's all right, that'd be great.
Yeah. So this is our library.
So we've got books on hacking, on intelligence, history of warfare.
Yeah, obviously the battalion reading list is here, but this is open for soldiers to come and if they want to read a book about EW 104, they can do that. Radar theory,
or play on the PlayStation.
Yeah.
It helps drive the creativity.
Indeed.
It's hard to manage. We've learned, you can't be an expert simultaneously on everything all of the time. Ebbs and flows where the focus areas are for the lab at any given time. But on this portion of the room is where we do all of our AI/ML stuff. So we've got a Lambda stack that runs, a couple different programs that we use generally for signal recognition and processing. And then this big aluminum box, an advanced radar waveform generator. Because we are in an unclassed space, it can be quite difficult to manipulate data. It's hard for me to go to the SCIF and say, I need the IQ waveform files of X and Y radar, because it's all behind a paywall, basically. But here, we can kind of manipulate our own parametrics as if they were coming live out of a radar, and then use those to study, analyze, break apart. So we'll also build training aids. This is a quad that we built for about $300. This is something that you would see mass produced. It's hobbyist stuff, obviously very vulnerable to EW. We might not utilize these in practice or at war as a unit, us. It's important to understand what makes them tick. And also because, soldiers are going to leave the 2nd Multi-Domain Task Force and they're going to go to Armor Brigade and Light Infantry Divisions. And so we like to provide an opportunity for them to get fundamental understandings of how these things operate and tick, so they're better educated when they get to where they're going. If Ukraine has taught us anything is, not every drone is coming back. And so, cost-benefit analysis says I need a lot that cost a little that can do 80% of what I need it to do most of the time. Okay. The Army likes to invest in like 120% solutions that a soldier will use maybe 10% of the functionality. I like to say I want to produce something that will give me 80% of what I want, but 100% of the time.
If somebody is in the army and is interested in this, I hesitate to use the word cutting edge because it's a cliche, but this kind of cutting edge development, this is the team they want to be in?
In our I can only speak for our formation. We take anybody that is interested, within reason, because we're pulling we say we pull them out of hide, but there's no MTO military personnel position under the battalion footprint that says you are the innovation person. Pearson, for example, was working at like the help desk at Battalion S6. So he's like an IT specialist for the Army, but has a personal interest in like AI and machine learning and coding and programming. And so he was interested in coming down. We said, absolutely. And so as we find soldiers that are interested in learning, but also have the personal initiative to dedicate like time and energy into learning, we will find projects around the lab that kind of align with their own personal interests. So it stays engaging. And while all of these things seem kind of disjointed, the analogy I like to use is there are tons of irons in the fire, but it is one fire, right?
On one of the tables is a bright yellow 3D printed drone built by the team, about the length of my arm. I ask about both the hardware and the software that went into it.
We figured out that for very inexpensive pieces of hardware and open source software, we can effectively crack the code on how to get data from point to point. So on board this aircraft is a media server that connects to a VPN and bidirectional LAN, and there's a bunch of nerd speak in there, but the so what of that is with about 5 seconds of latency, I was able to fly this in Poland and send the feed for the sensor and the camera directly to Arizona, where the rest of my units were.
Wow.
And that's not real time, but it's closer than a lot of what industry has to offer, at least at the price point of a $45 Raspberry Pi.
And how long did it take you to print the drone, and how big is the 3D printer that enabled you to do that?
Let's go into the place. So we use an array of 6 Prusa Core 1s.
Oh wow, so there's 6 of them here on the wall. Wow, and they're all printing now.
They're all printing now, yeah. So these 6 printers, which are, I will say these are relatively new to the lab, we got them last month. The print quality on these is very, very good. And for that smaller airframe that we flew in Poland, using all 6 of these printers, we can have a platform complete in about 8 hours. And that's assuming nothing goes wrong. On the 3D printing and additive manufacturing, it's a topic of interest, I think, for the Army and the DoDs. How do we make things at the edge? 3D printing is slow, but it's cheap. So it's kind of one of those, you got to pick your poison. There are things that are prone to error when you're 3D printing that can, cause that 8-hour timeline to expand rapidly.
Is the long-term thinking that you would be able to take printers like this into the field and be sort of printing, if not on the battlefield, close to, because at the moment they're plugged into the wall in this warehouse, but I'm thinking like longer term, is there an ambition for that kind of?
I don't see why there wouldn't be, because really, this is just my personal opinion, but each of those printers is about $1,000, give or take. And so, thinking about the amount of money that we spend on other things just to go to the field, $6,000 is not a ton of money in the grand scheme of things. And if I had 10 of these, you're just going to exponentially increase the amount of aircraft that you can print in a day. 3D printing, it has its use case. It's great for us for prototyping. Again, personal opinion, not where I anticipate the Army going for additive manufacturing, but it is an option, and it's a relatively inexpensive option, compared to bringing like an injection molding machine out into the field.
Back in the main workspace, I point to one of the monitors, showing an empty space and the time zones in various different theatres around the world.
Can you tell me what's on this screen here?
Yeah, that is actually a picture of the space before. So Sergeant Baumgartner was the one that actually put this room together with my predecessor. I was lucky enough to show up like a couple of days after they had finished putting it all together. But the picture of that room is what the space was about 15 months ago.
Pretty different.
Yeah, everything from the paint to the carpet, they did it all themselves by hand.
What's your proudest achievement?
I think it was just the realization that this is possible. I've been used to Army programs of record. I've been used to FSR support. Growing up in the Army, if your equipment breaks, you call the dude that knows the guy that can pay for the FSR to come out and walk you through fixing it. Or, paying for a mobile training team to like give you a 40-hour course on how to operate like a GUI. I didn't really have any contextual understanding that there are ways that you can achieve this stuff without, prior background or without industry support. You can just do it, and the Army will provide you a space to be able to do that. And I think, having done any of this, it's very proud. I couldn't say like one project's better than the other. I think in the aggregate, I'm proud of the unit for being as supportive as they have been of this space, both financially and just giving us the autonomy to kind of maneuver around and do the stuff that we think is important.
In my second dispatch on this theme, which you'll hear next week, I talked to members of another experimental US Army team, this time based in Italy, and from the command coordinating the wargaming exercises run by America. We explore the extraordinary implications of drone warfare for the success of different teams on the ground in those exercises. Stay tuned.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Francis and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons, to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.